Mr. Lahiru Patmalal, founder of Takas.lk, who's here from Colombo. Thank you, Lahiru. We also have with us from Thailand, Mr. Ukrit Visitjikaran. Sorry if I got that slightly wrong. He's CEO of Earthcare Innosis Company Limited. So welcome, Ukrit. And definitely good afternoon to you, Ukrit. We also have from Bhutan, Mr. Sonam Wanchuk, who's founder and developer of the Tiger's Nest Camp in Paro, Bhutan. Thank you for joining, Sonam. And I must mention that Sonam has joined us amidst truly dire circumstances. It's an unusual snowfall in Paro. And he's actually in one of his tents, which he'll talk about and join us. There were chances he wouldn't, so we are very glad you've made it. And last but not the least, we've got from Bangladesh, Mr. Fahim Ahmed with us, who's president and CFO at Pathao. Now, these are all very interesting ideas, interesting companies, and people will be talking about them soon. Before that, I'd like to set the context for this very interesting session. What is proof of concept? A lot of people, we all know what an idea is, right? Every entrepreneurial journey starts with an idea. Every day, there are thousands of entrepreneurs in every country of the world thinking of new ideas and thinking of how this idea can change the world. However, it's a fact that probably only about 5% of companies that actually go beyond the idea stage and make it to the next stage actually end up becoming successful companies. So why do a lot of these ideas not make it? Why do a lot of these ideas that were germinated in someone's mind are not able to translate themselves and transcend the different phases to become a viable business? That's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the very crucial first stage. The first stage is from idea to proof of concept. Proof of concept, or as a lot of us like to call it, POC, is nothing beyond the validation, the early stage validation of your idea, the ability to show something as what we can also call at the slightly next stage an MVP or a minimum viable product. But just before that, we have proof of concept. Proof of concept is when you're able to demonstrate to others. These could be business partners, these could be angel investors, these could be team members, and most importantly, I think, to yourself, which many entrepreneurs forget. When you're able to demonstrate to yourself that your idea can actually be a viable business. When you're able to take that idea which is in your mind and translate it down, distill it down firstly into a very clear and simple and lucid business plan. And then whether it's a technology business or a non-tech business, you're actually able to put a little bit of what I call flesh around the skeleton. So the skeleton is your idea, and now you're able to start putting a little flesh around that. You're able to give it shape. You're able to actually show to people and demonstrate to people, this is what I am talking about. This is what it's going to look like when it's out to market. And this is why I think this is going to become the start of a very interesting business. Everyone wants to change the world. Every entrepreneur wants to change the world. But let me tell you, this very crucial part of the journey, this very important part of the process, if we look at it like a funnel, lots of ideas, millions of ideas at the top of the funnel. The next stage is this very crucial stage, what we call proof of concept, is those ideas now given shape and form so that people can understand them. All your stakeholders, once again, your most important stakeholders, your business partners, who are you going to work with? Your customers, who are you going to service? In some cases, your suppliers, who are you going to take materials and inputs from? Fourthly, and very importantly, investors who will give you the resources, financial resources to go forward. And fifthly, the team that you will build, which I think is a very crucial part of it. So this is what we really want to talk about in this session. We want to leave everyone with very clear inputs on how to address this session. We will draw from the rich experience of the different panelists. We will get a lot of experience and a lot of inputs that we are going to get from Professor Ashutosh Sharma, who's secretary at the Department of Science and Technology, and sees probably a bunch of ideas almost every day and has seen many of them make it and many of them fail. And we would love to understand from him why this happens. We will also then connect the dots with other countries and cultures where, of course, startups and entrepreneurship is a common denominator everywhere. But are there nuances? Are there differences? And more importantly, 6 very exciting journeys of startups and how people dealt with their own startup and took it from an idea to a proof of concept. I'm going to stop here because I'm going to be coming in a lot more after the initial remarks. We have lots of interesting questions, but I definitely want to make sure that all our panelists get enough time to share their experiences with us. With that, I'd like to request Professor Ashutosh Sharma to start the proceedings and share his opening remarks on this topic, please.
Thanks, Deep, for setting up the stage so very nicely. And indeed, idea to proof of concept is that one very critical, compelling aspect of taking your startup or your entrepreneurship forward. Now, of course, it's very important to recognize that, of course, there are many sparkling ideas, but nothing succeeds until an idea whose time has come. We all know that as a cliche, but it really works. So when we are looking at prototyping an idea, when we are looking at the proof of concept, it's not sufficient to produce something that works and to showcase it. What's very important is that this particular prototype, that this particular proof of concept should embed in it the realities of the functions, not just realities of functions, but the problem statement and the view of the market and customers regarding what they are looking for in that product or that technology. So I often talk about this as know your problem, KYP, know your market, KYM, know your customers, of course, KYC. So even in preparation of prototype, it's very important that all these inputs actually go in there. And of course, we know that innovation is not a single event. So innovation is a chain. The back end of it is embedded in the knowledge system, which is ideas, and some amount of prototyping. And the front end is embedded in the market. So prototyping is really the first stage in which all of this comes together. From the knowledge to market, if you would. One also has to pay attention to what TRL level are we going to be preparing the prototype. Of course, more the better. It's not always possible to do it, but if we could retain as many bells and whistles to convince people at that point, so the prototype ought to be really as close to reality of the final product as I had in mind while starting out, because one doesn't get too many chances. You see, so 3 strikes and you are out. I think most of the time 2 strikes and you are out. So it's very necessary that we just don't have a Mickey Mouse model, if you would, kind of high school science fairs. That's not going to convince people. So that's one aspect, that all the design considerations, even the aesthetics, in addition to functions, are built into this prototyping exercise. If there are any standards to be satisfied, if there are any testing to be done, it's good to have all those backup documents, if you would, from the appropriate labs and testing facilities. So all that is going to really convince the people to whom you're going to demonstrate your product or technology. Next thing, it also is very helpful that in addition to something physical, that we make an extremely appealing presentation, which is experiential, which may be immersive. It could make use of AR, VR. So it's often not possible to be traveling all the time. So we should be able to share this very compelling presentation with people, so they get really good idea about what this is going to look like, what this is going to do, and so on. Okay, so these are very basic things. I think most people understand that presentations are very important. Beyond that, let us see what is it that we need for prototyping. So when I said that, look, innovation is a chain and every link of that chain has to be strengthened. And keeping that in mind, we started a program called Nidhi about 5 years ago, which was able to upscale both qualitatively and quantitatively our startup ecosystem. We made about, right now, DST is supporting about 140 tech incubators, which are incubating more than 4,000 technology companies. So there is a vast amount of experience which filters in from there. Um, I just want to share, so if we did a third-party analysis of this, in last 3 years, these companies produced about 28,000 crores of new, 28,000 crores rupees of new wealth and about 80,000 new jobs. So something was happening there. Now coming to prototyping or making concepts, one needs access to a lot of facilities, hardware, fabrication facility, testing facilities, and so on. So we are starting out centers called Sati. This year, 3 centers have been put in place, each with an investment of 125 crore rupees. Idea is that basically not everybody, not every startup, not every entrepreneur is going to have very easy access to all the high-end infrastructure that might be needed. So these Sati centers, which are professionally managed, provide 80% of their time providing the relevant information and infrastructural tools, including rapid prototyping, electronics, plastics, everything together, to MSMEs, to startups, to entrepreneurs. The second aspect that we looked at is that each of the incubators ought to be able to give a pre-incubation grant for prototyping, for proof of concept. So that grant is, well, right now is 10 lakhs Indian rupees. But in exceptional cases, if the committee were to opine that it needs more, that could be done. So what comes after mentorships and workshops and training and preparing people to take the plunge is basically this activity about the proof of concept. And so that the whole lot more, the people who got this grant for the proof of concept, about 35% of them actually went on to incubate a startup. So which is fantastic, which means this is an effective step to put in there. Now, there's also an organization called National Innovation Foundation in Ahmedabad. We asked them to make a portal of all the ideas that they have, which is about 200,000 ideas which are scouted from grassroots. Now, this portal is a very one-stop shop for many relevant ideas. And we are also putting in place now a fund for preparing the proofs of concept based on these ideas. So that would be a very large scheme or a program. We want to convert about 10,000 ideas, the top 10,000 ideas, which have relevance and market reality to go forward to the step of proof of concept so that this could be picked up by entrepreneurs. Finally, let me say that the policies play an important role in this. Of course, that this is a very limited aspect of innovation. But the point is, we need to integrate the invention ecosystem together with the innovation ecosystem. Each of these ecosystems may not have a huge weakness, but they don't work together seamlessly. So that the weakness is actually connecting our inventions and our innovations. In India, we call it Saraswati and Lakshmi working together with deep understanding of what each one brings on the table for their own good. And so this is part of our new policy, science, technology, innovation policy. It's in the last legs now, a couple of months, it should be notified. And a very huge focus is on these aspects of innovation, of course, invention, separately innovation, but how do they work together? Second policy, which may be relevant in this, is also coming out within a month now, is scientific social responsibility. Now, what that means very simply is that all our academic institutions, our R&D labs, they have a whole lot of informational resources. They also have infrastructural resources. They have human resources. Can we make use of all of this to reach out to people who can actually benefit by it without paying a huge price for it? So it is with the ease of access. It is with not putting in too much money in there. And so all of this huge resources really, the government of India itself puts in several tens of thousands of crores of rupees every year in order to create these resources. There's no point if they are locked up. So I think that this is going to bring energy which is needed for people to make use of all of this and go forward. So I don't know how much time I have now.
No, you're fine, sir. Please carry on. This is
okay.
Very
now, so I would conclude by saying that, look, because innovation, I said innovation could be viewed as a chain, but you can also view innovation as a pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid is the culture. And this culture, to change that, you have to catch people young, which means that you have to reach out to schools and spread the gospel of power of ideas. Not only that, power of ideas and how to convert idea into a prototype. So we started a new program called Manak. All of these are acronyms. And if I were to say the full form, it would take 2 years to do it. So I'm not going to do that. Manak, basically, it reaches out to 500,000 schools in the country last year. They do a competition for innovative ideas. Each school produces top 2 innovative ideas. They are not like your PhD ideas or high-tech ideas, but they recognize a need. So basically all these young kids, these bright minds, hungry minds, they look around and see what is the problem looking for a solution and what could possibly be the solution be, in what direction. So all of these ideas are uploaded in any of the languages of India online. We get about 1 million ideas every year. And then top 100,000 ideas are selected from there. And each of these kids get 10,000 rupees to convert idea into a prototype. So for that, they need access to some mentorship, some workshops. Atal Tinkering Labs, for example, are providing that backbone, a whole lot of workshops and mentoring. Now these 100,000 kids go forward with their great idea, which is converted into a proof of concept. Then they start competing at district level, state level, national level, every time 10% of these people going forward. And they receive more mentorship, they receive more encouragement and motivation. So essential idea is, look, going forward in the future, India, while now is reckoned number 3 in the world in terms of number of tech startups, but number like 15,000 or even 50,000 for a country of 1.3 billion people is not enough, which means you need to put a 0 or 2 zeros in front of this number very rapidly. And that's not going to happen unless we change the cultural dimensions starting from our schools. So this particular program is going to produce the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, but in much larger numbers. This is to bring the excitement and power of ideas into our young minds. Thank you. So I would conclude there, Deep.
Thank you very much, Professor Ashutosh. I think that's amazing what all is happening. I'm going to come back to you after everyone's opening remarks. I do have a couple of questions, but I think what really struck me was how much work you are doing at the grassroots level to make sure that entrepreneurs and now even schools people are encouraged early. And also, I love the way the lens has now changed, that innovation is actually going to be a change agent. And I can tell you from my personal experience and being involved with the startup ecosystem, what has happened in the last 5 years, I don't think has ever happened for startups. So it's really commendable to see this. And thank you for all the support. I think for young entrepreneurs, they've got to be aware of these resources and reach out to them. Today, there's no dearth of support that they can get. Okay. We are going to move to the beautiful country of Nepal. We're going to request Mr. Sikshit Bhatta, who's co-founder and CEO of Toodle Toodle, to talk about his startup and how he actually took Toodle Toodle from idea to proof of concept. Also, please feel free to mention anything else that you think will be relevant for us here, what you found as either challenges in your country and your ecosystem, or some very positive policy steps or otherwise that you felt, and share your wisdom with us. So over to you, Sikshit.
Thanks, Deep. It's just one Toodle, no Toodle, so just a single Toodle.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. It has a nice twist to its name, so people confuse.
Right.
Thanks for for this invitation. And before I begin, I'd just like to set the tone. When we began this journey almost 5 years ago, it wasn't a rocket science to understand that people in cities like ours don't have a mobility, right? And if you were to compare this to the developed markets like US, where they already have an existing infrastructure of mobility, be it the subways or the trains or things like that, or even Europe, an app like a ride-sharing app like Uber is just a way by which people find convenience in mobility. But for a country like ours and a city like Kathmandu, with almost 5 million people and no proper public transport, basically your largest competitor, which is the government, does not exist in this market, right? And basically the way we designed our brand and our offering was not just about offering people with the convenience of transport, but rather of freedom of movement and the freedom of mobility, because that is what people would lack. And when we began these services, most of the entrepreneurs would try to approach this with an idea of solving a problem, and an app would invariably solve that problem. But what we realized was a lot to do with entrepreneurship till the time you go into a proof of concept. It's not just about solving a problem, but it's about changing human behavior in mass, in large number. And why it is important and why it was important for us was because, in Kathmandu, we didn't have that existing behavior of hitching a ride on someone else's motorcycle from going from point A to point B. Because again, the issue of culture would come in. How would you trust an unknown person? And how would you get at the back of a motorcycle of a person with that proximity? And if you were to look at our infrastructure, you would find that the people who lack mobility would be women. 50% of our rides are taken by women almost every day. So, there was this cultural aspect of how would you trust an unknown person? So that's one part of the problem that we required to solve. And this is something that we really didn't realize when we began our journey. Now, on the other side, we felt that, okay, if you have an app and there's so many people without jobs, so many youth without jobs, but you still have motorcycles, they could make income. We thought, okay, wow, this could just solve the problem, because one end we have a mobility problem, at the other end we have a job problem, and people would just use an app and connect. We were surprised to realize that people didn't have dignity in labor, dignity in work. And it's also very important in a city like Kathmandu, because culturally and historically, Kathmandu comes from a very affluent society. Per capita alcohol consumption of Kathmandu is pretty high because that happens in affluent families. And we also realized at the very beginning of our journey that if people were giving a ride to someone on a motorcycle, they would not want to be seen as doing that, right? So we had to solve these problems. So going from point A to point B, from idea to the proof of concept, the biggest challenge, let alone the challenge with the regulation and the government, if we find time, we can talk about that in the next segment. But the biggest challenge was to change a human behavior, because giving and taking a ride on a motorcycle through the use of the app was not an existing behavior. And people didn't know what Uber was. People were not using 4G. People didn't have digital payments and how they could use that. So a lot of work that we did was around that. And how we solved that problem was by offering people with, say, dignity in labor, dignity in work, and how we treat our bikers, our partners. So the whole idea, how we designed our apps and things like that. So a lot of that was a challenge. And just to wrap it up, as entrepreneurs, I've always been saying this, when you begin your journey, you have an illusion of knowledge. And that's a psychological bias that we have, right? If we were to ask a person, do you know how the helicopter flies? 8 out of 10 people would say, I don't know how the helicopter would fly. But if you were to ask them detailed question, okay, tell me how the rotor works, to how the physics works, then their rating go down. So I think it's all about uncovering that illusion of knowledge. And the key that we looked into was the behavioral aspect and the cultural aspect of it. And we're very happy to have ignited that behavior change where mobility is now through the use of an app. Thank you very much.
Fascinating, Sikshit. One would have never thought we are so close, and one would have never realized that the real challenge around doing something which I guess was inspired maybe by Uber and others, but on bikes is different. But at Tootle, you had to actually counter behavioral challenges and cultural challenges in the mindset, which sometimes are the biggest ones. Maybe before we just move on to the next panelist, I just want to know one or two interesting things that you did to break those barriers.
Fahim is here in the panel, who is our fiercest competitor who came in later. But what we did, if when we began our app, and Fahim would realize that our app, in our driver's app, people could select, choose, take a particular ride. Because when we began that services, we didn't have many people who wanted to do that. But a standard or Ola and Uber would dispatch that ride to an individual, right? Because if we had done that, people would not take that ride. So one of the things that we did to begin with was our app, the partners app, the driver's app was populated with a number of bookings, and they could choose which one to take. That's the first thing. The second thing that we did was we didn't call them drivers or riders. We called them partners. And one of the campaigns that we ran at the very beginning was treat a Tootle partner not like a driver with a bike, but like a friend with a ride. We just wanted to make sure that it's more of a one-to-one, a friendship kind of a
Excellent.
very cool.
Excellent.
Yeah, so those are a couple of examples.
No, appreciate that. And if we have time, we'll anyway come back with a few questions for you. But I thought that was fascinating. Thank you. We're going to move to Lahiru from Sri Lanka. Lahiru is going to talk about his startup. Maybe you can just start, Lahiru, by explaining in one succinct sentence what Takas.lk does.
Of course, glad to be here. Hi to everybody. So Takas.lk is essentially one of Sri Lanka's, if not Sri Lanka's first e-commerce company. We started operations in 2012. So it was a long time ago, and it's been a grueling process because it's a smaller market. It's a war of attrition as opposed to other startups in bigger markets. So that's what essentially Takas does. Takas is a pure play e-commerce website which had at the onset the plan of selling products to Sri Lankans by Sri Lankans.
Wow.
In terms of, it's interesting in terms of proof of concept, so we are kind of two hats essentially. Takas.lk got acquired by a large conglomerate, the B2C arm, very recently. And we also have a technology arm under the same company, which gives back-end solutions from, first mile, which is essentially picking up a product, CRM, inventory management, all of that. And that all happened during the life cycle of Takas.lk. And that itself has become a startup. But, proof of concept played more of a role there because we have customers both in Sri Lanka as well as regionally for that product. But to go back to Takas, in terms of what happened was, I moved to Sri Lanka in 2009, and I was in, let's say, more mature markets. I was trying to buy a television, which I saw at a gas station, an advertisement for it. And I thought, must Google this and try to see whether I can get it. And sure enough, at that time, none of the main players in Sri Lanka had what you would call an e-commerce site. Actually, there were no e-commerce sites in Sri Lanka. Then I ended up trying to speak to a few partners who ended up becoming my co-founders, a guy called Dilendra Bimalasekar and Muttasa Musaji, and said, look, I don't think anybody in Sri Lanka is doing it. If I'm searching online for a product, chances are other people are also looking for a product. And then that's how this kind of conversation started. So it's very different. We didn't have a prototype. Usually now when I give talks to people, I show the PowerPoint presentation, which we found angel funding for. And I must say it was abysmal, right? So it was really, really poor. I couldn't even navigate myself on a PowerPoint presentation. So we were lucky enough at that point for people to have taken a chance and given us some seed funding. And the reason that all kind of culminated was, Rajan Anandan, man of Sri Lankan origin, I feel he carries the passport. He's based out of India. He wanted the Sri Lankan ecosystem to kind of flourish. He wanted entrepreneurs to do all of this. And in Sri Lanka, in that kind of context, there was no government funding. And obviously, no financial institution was on their right mind to put money into a startup, certainly something out of a PowerPoint presentation. So we had at the onset a very good idea of what problem which was going to be solved. And again, it wasn't rocket science, right? E-commerce has worked everywhere in the world, including India. So we were essentially copying what was happening around the world and making it, we put a local twist to it. I think we introduced cash on delivery at the time, again, copied from India. So the flavoring of Sri Lanka was put into it, but we essentially knew that the problem existed because there was nothing else kind of catering to a marketplace. So we utilized pre-existing technologies. We started on a Magento front end and so on and so forth. And as the company then matured, we then found out problems with scaling in a nascent e-commerce marketplace, which is essentially where our technology arm came in. So then we said, okay, Oracle ATG doesn't work. None of these big boys will work in terms of backend solutions. Can we build this by ourselves? And that's kind of what we've come to right now. And now we're reselling to other emerging markets. So that in a nutshell encompasses our journey from 2012 to where we are right now.
Thank you, Lahiru. Very candid admission that you got funded on a PowerPoint, which was also not very impressive. But I think there's something there, because not every time can one prototype. So in many things you can and many things you can't. You had it in your mind, you were not able to. Also, the time was probably right. Probably e-commerce was booming in India and in other parts. And like you mentioned, Rajan, who's a dear friend and a big supporter, he's also on this conference. Rajan was obviously very keen to see how we can kickstart what's happening in Sri Lanka as well. But I am sure what you're not telling us, and you're being modest, is that people backed you because they knew that you had the capability, you and your team, to do it, and you had probably done something before. So I think we'll talk a bit about that. What happens when you can't prototype? What happens when you can't demonstrate a POC? And maybe this will be very relevant then. Thank you so much. We're going to move to Ukrit from Thailand. Ukrit is CEO of Earthcare Innosis Company Limited. Ukrit, over to you to tell us about Earthcare Innosis, and also to tell us about how you went from idea to proof of concept.
Sure. Thanks, Deep. So let me start with this, right? Because I have been found 3 companies. I can start and sharing like what the first one that's looked like. That is in 2010. And that one was when everything is like the iPhone 2, right? The iPhone 2 is very old. And then we have an idea that we start something, an app that will change the future. So when we did that, as the engineer, it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting, the response from the market, the response from the consumer and customers. But another thing that we learn a lot from that, because when we create a system where the user can create some content themselves and start to use that content to generate revenues, and then we found that the real customer is not that particular person. So that's something we learned from the first startup. And then the second startup that we did was about breaking that, the first one, and then attach e-commerce to it. And that startup is going pretty well, and is because of the COVID right now is keep on going up, which is quite a good thing. But when I started the Earthcare, this one is start with a passion about how do we solve the problem, the health problem, the food problem that we have in everyday lives. Everything you buy from the market, the vegetable, or even like the water that you use to plant the vegetables, all of those, how do you know that those are safe to eat or even to plant? So the Earthcare concept start with, okay, in today's market, when you go to the market, how do you know the vegetable is safe? When you order something online and they deliver vegetable at home, how do you know it's safe? You don't have tools or the test kit to test it. You don't have lab at home to actually do it. But then you're being forced and then accept that, okay, I just have to eat it. So that's the whole concept of how the Earthcare start. So we have the test kit for herbicide, insecticide, and things that you expose to everyday lives. So when we start that concept, the question is, how do we make it actually work in the market? And who is our customer? We go back to the consumer insight again. Who really our customers? So if I ask you, Deep, so who you think is the customer, Deep, for the test kit?
For your test kit?
Yeah, I mean, for testing like herbicide, insecticide, and things like that.
Yeah, it should be the farmer eventually, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that actually that actually our first thought too. Maybe the farmer should be the one who do the test, but I found out that actually there are three prongs to it. The first one is a consumer. There are consumers who are like very health conscious. They want to do this at home, or people that has little kid. They want to make sure that what their kids have is safe. And the third one is, believe it or not, the restaurant and the modern trade. Modern trade want to make sure that they can marketing this as a safe food, right? And the restaurant is also want to qualify that their food is the organic or at least like toxic-free food. So this is like the whole thing. But then if you think about this is not the IT. It's more like the nanotech. It's actually you use deep tech to actually detect these chemical substances. The thing is, we cannot take risk doing create a false alarm. For example, if you're like, okay, if we don't use this nanotechnology to detect this kind of chemical inside the products, then we use other method that can estimate or like evaluate like the chance of having like the contaminations. If we do that, then the false alarm rate is pretty high. And when that happen, it's pretty much lure like those lawsuits coming to us. So the thing is, we have to make sure that the prototype, the product itself is tailored toward the real customers, and also on the other side, looking into like the side of the law and everything else in the market as well.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, fascinating. I've also learned, Ukrit, from some other places that one can also use AI. And I think when you're mentioning deep tech, have you seen the applicability of AI out here? Because your testing, you might learn something when you're looking for contamination in one particular product category, which tomorrow can be then part of the testing protocol for the next one, because something new comes up and you didn't know about it. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. In terms of doing the test kit and check for the contaminations, right? There are many levels. The first thing is, I mean, if you want to really details and make sure that this one won't cause a false alarm, to use like this kind of test kit, the EarthCat test kit, doing nanotech. But usually when you have like huge farm that you want to if the government want to do the screening by using the UAV to fly over the land and then using the spectral camera to detect the chances of contamination. In that particular case, AI could play a big role. They can do actually different kind of spectrum pattern recognitions and doing all kind of processes, and then connect it with the consumer and the value chain, starting from the producer all the way down to the consumer, to pinpoint exactly where the problem comes from. And that actually will help not only the farmers, but also the consumers, right? The farmers expose themselves to chemicals without knowing it, right? Because it's coming from the water, up north, flow down, and then consumers will know because they don't have a way to check. They just look at the label and say it's safe. So then they assume it's safe, but it's actually not.
Yeah, fascinating. I think you will have a huge market in India as well. I'm sure you're thinking about it. But moving on, time check, we're at 12:40. So I'm going to move on to Sonam now and request him. Sonam is the founder and developer of Tiger's Nest Camp at Paro. Truly one of the most beautiful places I've seen in the world. So Sonam, please tell us about your startup.
Thank you so much, Deep. Good afternoon, namaste, and hello to everybody. I would like to start my statement by, quoting Mahatma Gandhi, Bapu the Great, where he had once said, a lot of ideas don't get started because of the fear that they may not be successful. And I think if you really look at a quote of such kind, it actually gives you an encouragement to believe in yourself when you actually go out in the market to look at a startup that you would want to set up. Now, since my startup is in a hospitality industry, sadly, there may not be a prototype of how I could make it into a product and then look at it before it is even been launched into the market. Because in the hospitality, I have experienced that in my case, in particular with the Tiger's Nest Camp, what we had to look at was we had to look at the three aspects of the startup before we actually implemented it into an idea, into a concept. Number one, understand the market very carefully. By knowing what kind of product that you are building and what would be and who would be your market was one of the most important, so to say, a prototype for us. Number two, how are we going to reach them? And then what are the requirements in today's time that we'll be able to reach out to the market that is available for us, or in fact, the customers in our case. So these were some of the important things that we actually thought of before we actually went into venturing this idea and then putting that idea into a concept. Most importantly, for a startup, this is like a piece of advice from my own personal experience, is that before you even indulge it into any ideas or taking it forward, it is very important that you start convincing somebody, that you start convincing your idea, that you start believing in what you are doing, and you convince that one individual. And that one individual is none other than yourself. If you do not have the confidence in yourself, if you do not have the faith in your product that you would want to launch into the market, I feel at one point of time, you might stop, you might pause, or you might start breaking down. And that is the time that, like I mentioned, you will need to have a confidence in yourself. And often, most of the time, this is one of the first of its kind in Bhutan. As Mr. Deep has mentioned earlier, Bhutan has seen a boom in the hospitality industry over the past half a decade. If you see Paro, where I am located right now, we had hardly about 30 to 40 hotels, but now today it's over 100 plus hotels. So we started, in a time when the whole world was shutting down because of the pandemic. But we opened our doors because we believed that the idea that we were going to put forward was something unique. And we understood the market, that when Bhutan closed its border to the outside world because of in the wake of the pandemic, the locals were they were in a position to travel within the country, the domestic market. Of course, that's not too great, but then they were actually thinking of traveling within the country. So every experience that was being offered to them from an hotel perspective or from a hospitality perspective was the same. Maybe the location was different from one another. But we made it up to answer that call because the product was unique. It's one of the first of a unique tented resort in the country. So understanding the product that you would want to put in is one of the most important aspects as a startup.
I appreciate it.
Secondly, startup is not going to be a 100-meter race that you start and you have an endpoint. It is not going to it's a relay of marathon. You need to have partners where you might be the fastest runner to start, but you will have to understand that you have key team players in between that relay race who will also need to run along with you to reach the endpoint. So it's a relay of marathon race, like I always say, whereby you cannot stop and you need to keep moving. And then that is where I felt as a startup, if we have those key points taken into consideration, I think nothing would be impossible. It is also important that you play the devil's side yourself at times, because there can be a lot of questions, there can be a lot of concerns being raised. When we did this startup here in Bhutan, when I started up with this project, I was being thrown with hundreds of questions. It's going to be a tent. How are you going to manage with the heating? How are you going to do it in the winter season? Are you going to see only 6 months of operations? How are you going to really, cope up with the lifespan of the tents, X, Y, and Z? Do you have the expertise to do that project? Because you are going to be the first. And will you get the assistance of supports of suppliers or whoever? So these were some of the questions that were being thrown at us initially when we were in the point of investing. So at that point, when you had the confidence in yourself to start off what you wanted to do, and you believed that your idea was something that you can really come to a conclusion, I felt that was something that really encouraged us to keep forward and then ask ourselves the worst of the questions and the worst case scenario, and then develop an idea based on that, and then keep moving forward. So these are some of the most important aspects that I feel as a startup one could always keep in mind. And for Bhutan, in terms of policy, I would like to share that we actually did not really have a policy in place to guide a luxury tented resort. So we came in at a point where even there was no policy. And we came in at a point when we went to our investors, they were not even really sure of how and what we were actually asking for. A resort, a hotel with a tent? Okay, you need to tell us. And I would like to support Mr. Ashutosh, who was mentioning earlier that presentation actually helps your way forward. Presentation, whereby you come up with the concept, that you put it up in your PowerPoint presentations, you explain to them what are your requirements, and you explain to them what is the end result that you're actually looking at, and most importantly, involving your product as a market and the consumers as well, so that you are in a position to convince. So having said all these things, it is very important as a startup to go with the flow and not stop just because there is one issue in some particular area, but rather take it up as a challenge. Never stick to complain as a problem, but rather take complaint as a challenge and then move forward so that you can actually see a light in the tunnel of your startup innovation and your process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Sonam. Beautiful words, and appreciate them. I'm going to move to Fahim. Fahim is from Bangladesh. He's the president and CFO at Pathao, and he's going to tell us about his experience at Pathao, and then we will have time for a few questions.
Thank you, Deep, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity for me and to Pathao to talk about the tech ecosystem we're building here in Bangladesh and in our corner of South Asia. So Pathao is the largest digital platform in Bangladesh and a leader in ride-sharing, food delivery, and e-commerce logistics services. We are also delighted to have expanded our presence outside of Bangladesh beyond borders into Nepal. So very excited to be on this August panel over here.
Okay. Now I understand the comment that was made by. Okay,
exactly. So what we're most passionate about and what we aspire towards is to enable digital transformation in our markets, to take the experiences that people are enjoying in the offline world today, be it moving around, transportation services, buying products, eating out, getting grocery, all of these services that are in the analog world, we'd like to bring them online and really truly enable the building of a digital economy in our part of the world. Now, our journey actually began from very humble beginnings. And in fact, I love the title of this panel, Idea to Proof of Concept. It's the principle, it's the core principle that we embody here at Pathao. And not just that, it's also led to the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey and coming on board of Pathao over 3 years ago, very early on, and partner up with our co-founders. So the approach that we take to building a product today is the same that we had during our very humble beginnings. And it starts with identifying a problem, not just any problem, but a problem that exists today, that is massive, that is almost insurmountable, and that is crying out loud for a solution. And in many cases, the market, the consumers may not even know what the solution is. They may not even know what a good product is. And that's where the lived experiences of the founders, the team, and the management can help shape that solution. And that's exactly what happened in the story of Pathao. So my partner, Ilyas, the co-founder and CEO of Pathao, at the time, 4 or 5 years ago, just graduated from university, completed his MBA program, and he had tried out a number of different things. One of the things that he was trying out is solving the logistics problem, and then which led to the solving of the transportation problem. Now, at the time in Bangladesh, especially in Dhaka, quite like many of the cities in which our panelists live, did not have a public transportation system. There was not even an integrated bus network. So it's not just that it took 1.5 hours to get from one part of the town to just another 7 kilometers away. I mean, it's almost as slow as walking. And not only that, it was costly, those solutions just did not exist. So it was that lived experience that informed. So the solution that we came up with was very unique and unusual. It's not just that there was no taxi culture in Bangladesh or in Dhaka at the time. It's not just that there was no bike culture at the time. Bikes were perceived to be someone who's a thrill seeker or someone who's up to no good tends to drive. It's also that people were not comfortable with purchasing a service or a product online using their phones. So it started with building a community. Ilyas and some of our founding team members would stand in front of the universities with bikes, trying to convince people to get on bikes or handing out their phone numbers. That led to setting up of a Google Sheet, and that you could call the MVP. That's how it all began. It's that basic. But what we were able to achieve is validation that when the problem is so great, the solution, even if it is suboptimal, can get traction. And that's what attracted to many of our investors, one of whom came on board as an angel investor. He saw the same promise and potential in Patao that he saw as one of the first few angel investors in Gojek, saw in Gojek and in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia. So it's very important to be able to demonstrate through the proof of concept that you're able to tackle a significant problem head on and in a way that people can pattern recognize and bring to the table solutions and capital and tools that can help scale. Now, that's something that we have retained even as we have moved forward. Now, we like to say that we dedicate maniacal focus to solving that problem and disregard everything else. And that takes constant iteration. That takes constant MVP and proof of concept in building out new features. Now, Patao has since grown to build a platform that brings on other services. So today we have 11 services, which all are based on a solid foundation of our strength in logistics, in having the strongest local tech team that can quickly build products and localize these products, and having the most recognizable consumer tech brand. So leveraging these resources, we're constantly reshaping our product and bringing new services into the market. We'd like to think that we have retained the same DNA in us that we began with almost 5 years ago today. And that's what allows us to go from ideation to MVP within a matter of a couple of weeks. We take the approach of failing fast. And in fact, during the COVID period, in the last 9 months, we have launched 5 new services. And what we've been heartened to see an acceleration towards that digital transformation. A lot of the users are now coming onto digital services platform to avail these services that were previously offline. And we're so excited and really humbled to be part of this journey. I'll turn it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fahim. And really, it's been an amazing journey and you're going multinational. I didn't realize we have competitors on the panel, but we clearly do. But it looks like it's a fascinating approach of ride sharing and delivery, and reminds me of some other companies which are doing multiple things. But like you said, there's a common a strength and a common skill set that you're leveraging, which is great. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to ask Professor Ashutosh this question first, but I think this question works for all. The focus of the panel is at the end of the day to give valuable insights and advice to young entrepreneurs out there, people who are starting their own journey. I'm sure they've learned a lot listening to all of you. So, sir, you have clearly seen more startups than all of us put together, probably. This is what you do, sir. What are the common pitfalls that you think entrepreneurs should try and avoid? Because I think that would be very valuable. And then I'll go around the table and ask the same question to others, but would love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, actually, there are at least a dozen pitfalls. So we don't even know where to begin, but I would just focus on our theme. Which is we are looking at prototyping and we are looking at the presentation of idea in a form that would be acceptable. Now, it's also, like I said, we must know totally the customer for which we are pitching this particular proof of concept. And it came out very clearly from the talk by Ukrit. So he said, look, who are the customers? Now, for his test kit, customers could be the farmer, the customer could be the seller, the customer could be a homemaker, customer could be the one who is purchasing the vegetables and using them. Clearly, you would need different kind of models. You would need different differentiators, different complexity of the test kit, different accuracy, and different price levels. So indeed, there would be kits which would go to companies, the kits that would go for planning, the kits that will go to government, and the kits that would go to customers. So it is important that we figure in our customer base, our market targets while doing proof of concept. Now, second thing that I would just very clearly say and leave there, which is based on my own experience, the last startup that I mentored with my PhD student was actually on a very high-tech stuff, which is making nanofibers by electrospinning. And these machines are available all the way from Japan to Europe to US. So I said, so look, why would an Indian company make and sell that globally? So therefore, think about a differentiator other than price. Okay, so think about right in the beginning, a differentiator, a unique selling point, if you would. And that unique selling point often I have found is not only in delivering the product, but the customer is also asking for knowledge that goes with it, which means how would he be able to effectively use that product? And this is where many companies are weak. So that this particular company was hugely successful because of the fact that when you sell this machine for making nanofibers, either to a research lab or to a company, you first should know what is it that they want to make with it, and then provide the solution together with the machine. And that's often not done by competitors. So essentially, we are saying that you should bundle in your prototype, in your proof of concept, not just the stuff, the physical stuff or an app that goes in there, but the confidence in the customer that there would be an effective use of this particular product for his needs. I conclude there for lack of time.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Really appreciate, I think, invaluable advice. What is your USP beyond price? How can you do something better than others, not only locally, but even international market? Play to your strengths, and how can you do it and scale up at the same time? Doing it at scale is the challenge. Many people do a great job of boutique businesses, but the scale up becomes a challenge, which is perhaps the topic for another panel. You know, we could really go on and on. I have so many questions, and I think we could learn from all of you. We will find another format to engage. Unfortunately, we have to keep strictly to time. We've got 60 minutes. And, you know, there were many questions I had to ask around funding, Fahim being an iBanker, but unfortunately, it won't be possible today. We will do this again. So thank you so much. We also lost Sikshit, towards the end, his connection broke off. So thank you for joining, Sikshit. But thank you to each one of you. Professor Ashutosh, really appreciate you taking this time out. Fahim, again, international, very busy doing what you're doing. Good luck through the pandemic to all of you. Sonam, big challenges with hospitality, I know today, but things will come back. Indians can't wait to get to Bhutan, so hang in there. Ukrit, I think what you're doing is fascinating. You have a big market internationally, perhaps start with India, and I think you can do something amazing here. And Lahiru, we are looking for you to become the next big e-com giant out of Sri Lanka. So thank you everyone very much, and wish you all the best for the future. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.